this one do Snapchat. Hello everybody, and welcome to my debrief on the three sources, being source one, the chapter 1 of Barracoon, and then B, being Alice Walker, and C, the book review by Brown Girl. And so we're going to start with A, being the chapter 1. My initial thoughts on the chapter is I thought it was very fascinating. I thought it was also a little tough to hear, as it's Kujo's story sad. There's no if, and, or buts about that. It's a sad story, and you hate to see someone treated like that, for sure. So it's a tough read, for sure. But basically, it starts with Hurston going up to Kujo's home on his patio, and she basically sees him in there with his caretaker, as he is very old. He's the last survivor of his slave boat, actually. So he's an old man, and his wife is dead. He doesn't have any family living with him, so he's a lonely man, and that's shown through chapter 1. But basically, Hurston goes up and she calls Kujo his African name, being Kusula. And basically, Kujo gets very emotional when he hears his African name, and this kind of shows the audience, including Hurston, basically Kujo's longing for wanting to be called his native name, and just how much he misses the African culture, his family, his friends back in Africa, the ritual. So, and then basically what happens after that is Hurston asked Kujo, can I ask you like 6 or 7 questions about his life? And Kujo gets thrilled. He's super happy because he wants to get his story out. His exact response was, I want you everywhere you go to tell everybody what Kujo say and how I come in a merry icky soil since the 1959 and never see my people no more. So we basically see two sides of Kujo here. We see the top half, we see that he really wants to get his story out, which is new to the reader, as we didn't know that yet. But in the second part, which we already kind of knew, but it's emphasized now, is and never see my people no more. So he's basically saying again how he misses his people, and this is years, a bunch of years after he actually was in Africa. So we see that he thinks about it all the time as he's bringing it up in this conversation with Hurston so early on. And then as their conversation basically develops, he also states, once he gets to America, he's basically, his slave owner asks him, what's your name? He says, my name is, because he says his name's Kujo Lewis. He goes, Kujo Lewis, and Kujo basically responds with, my name is not Kujo Lewis. It Kuluso, which is his African name. When I giddy in a Mariaki soil, Mr. Jim Mayer, he try call me my name. But it too long, you understand me? So I say, well, I you property. He say, yeah. There I say, I call you Kujo. And then he says, but in a Afriki soil, my mama, she named me Kulusula. So basically, they give him this name in America because his African name, which is Kulusula, they basically say is too long. So they give him this fake name. So we see why he gets so emotional when Hurston calls him Kusla at the beginning of the passage. But this really, what I really got out of the chapter was through these, kind of the last quote especially, is it kind of showed me that Hurston's description of the interaction between her and her grandfather Kujo showed me how slavery robbed Kujo of not only freedom but his heritage. And we don't really see that enough. We kind of just think, oh, they're over here, they're slaves, they have no freedom. But we forget about the heritage, and this story really shows us that. And Cujo's way of life and his family, his friends, his life and his heritage is ruined from being enslaved in the African slave trade. And we see this, and that was really what I got out of chapter 1. And then going on to chapter B, Alice Walker. Alice Walker makes a lot of good points. She basically says how Barracoon was a really hard read for her, which it was for me too, because it's a sad story, man. It's a sad story. And she also goes on to say how it helps us understand problems black people had way back when. And she actually, I'm going to quote her here. She says, "It resolutely records the atrocities African people inflicted on each other long before shackled Africans, traumatizing, disorientated, starved, arrived on ships as black cargo in the hellish West." So she's basically saying how her reading this, she's basically mind blown, because she sees how these African nations, they basically go in and they try to steal and enslave African natives from other tribes, and that's who they give to the African slave trade. And she just thinks that's preposterous. She can't wrap her head around why that's why not. She thinks she's basically implying how she doesn't understand why all these African tribes just team up and basically fight against these Americans coming over and saying, "Give me people." She doesn't understand. So then she states, Africans were only victims, which I thought this was a very good quote. Africans were only victims of the slave trade, not participants. They were victims. They had no, I thought that was a really good quote. I mean, basically they had no say in anything. They weren't participants. They were just victims. They were victimized by other African tribes, the Americans, the Europeans, and it's just hard to hear Kudajo's story. And then she describes how black African Americans she later describes black Africans as machinery, and she compares it to machinery because machinery can be raped, destroyed, and cheated. So she's basically saying that, stating how these African people are getting put through, terrible, terrible circumstances, and it's just really, really, really hard to see. And then she goes on to talk about Cujo's life after he becomes free, as she shows how he built a church, a community, built his own house, family, and she's basically using this. And what I got out, she doesn't state it, but what I got out of this is it's basically showing all these white people that these black people were smart all along. They thought of them as this lower power. They weren't smart, but it just shows they were just as smart. They were probably smarter. I mean, just terrible, terrible, terrible assumptions by the white people that black people were just so dumb and they needed to be enslaved. And then basically Cujo's life, tragedy occurs, deaths occur, his wife dies, family dies. He becomes very lonely for not only his family but also Africa. And then people in the neighborhood saw this, and they basically asked Kujo to they saw his wisdom alone, that he was lonely, and they wanted him to talk to their kids, talk to them, and give them wisdom, because he was a wise man. And they saw this. And that's basically what Alice Walker basically said. She basically just explained his life after, during the book, just the tragedy. She basically just focuses on the tragedy, the real thing, and how their heritage was taken away from them, and how sad it was. And then we move on to the book review, and basically she begins with the prefix, in which she basically says the book is to share Cujo's story and is not a bibliography. She states it's a book about the last slave alive for the Calatilda. I probably totally butchered that, but that's basically the slave boat that Cujo took over to Americi, as he says, soil. And she says Alice Walker's introduction is incredible. She says it's brilliant. She loves Alice Walker's contribution to this book. She says she enjoyed the story because Cujo's story is in dialect. She enjoys the constant quotes from Cujo, and she really likes that aspect of the book because she says it makes it feel real. It makes it feel real. She says the book itself, due to the quotations, the dialect is perfectly done. But then she goes on to explain her problems with the book, and she has quite a few problems with the book. She says she expected more from. She says she expected more publication as a whole, which basically means she does not. They don't include what happened to African Town. She says she basically means it's too short. She says it seems unfinished. Afterward, there was a slap in the face, she says, as it's only 20 pages focusing on if it's plagiarized. She says there's basically, at the end of the book, there's 20 pages focused on if it's plagiarized. She says it was completely unnecessary, and it takes away Cujo's story, which made her mad, she says. But however, she does recommend the book because she says Cujo's story is very life-changing, and it just shows a new aspect of just what Africans went through. And then she said she found Pahomie woman warriors very fascinating to read about, which she refers to Black Panther as they're in Black Panther. They're the woman in Black Panther. But in the book, she says they're brutal, which she liked. She liked this aspect of the book, as she says they actually would wear heads on their waist, which is obviously very graphically disturbing. And she gives perspective that you want to learn about African tribes. That's what she got out of the book. She says it makes you want to learn more about Africa as a whole and the tribes. She says Cujo's story is not only about separation, but shows aspect of longing for his home, which we talked about already. I think me, Alice Walker, and Brown Girl all saw that in the book, and that's very obvious. I think every reader will see that. And she says African Americans treated Cujo and family like beasts. This is because Cujo was basically captured at the end of the slave trade. So when he went over, he still did some rituals that the African American people just laughed at, and they thought he was basically a beast. And she states that, and due to Cujo, just because he was believing in his African ways, and that's basically what Brown Girl says. I thought it was a very fascinating read, and I do recommend all three of these. They're brilliant storytellers, and I've learned a lot from these three choices of media.